This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman. And you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
Gotham City is out of control.
An entire city screaming in fear.
Supervillains walk the streets, preying on the innocent.
They will learn the true nature of power.
The police are powerless. A creature prowls this urban wasteland.
What is that?
He moves in darkness. For some, he is a rumor, a name whispered in the corridors of the underworld, waiting for the chance to strike. Let every criminal know the acid taste of fear.
You crazy? Bat! Giant bat!
Gotham has forgotten what justice means. The Dark Knight is here to remind them. Who are you? Batman. Good guys wear black.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 155 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, and sitting alongside me as he is each and every week, my good friend and good brother, that's right, Liam. Welcome to episode 155 of the DCAU Review.
That's right, we are wrapping up the month of April here with one final Batman the Animated Series review, and it's a big one this week, Cal. It's not only is it a fun, memorable episode for the series, but it's also really one of the first, if not the first, DC superhero crossovers that we got in the DCAU, as this episode is aptly titled and features the character of the same name, Zatanna.
That's right. It is a bit of a tent pole or a monumental occasion for the DCAU. I don't think that, even if we looked at episodes out of order, that there weren't crossovers before this. So this is the first inkling that there might be superheroes outside of those in Gotham, although I guess the argument could be made whether or not she's presented as a superhero in this episode. But we'll get to that when we get into our plot discussion today. Before we do, I'm sure you have the official Imdb Synopsis for this week's episode, as you do each and every week. This episode, Liam, originally aired on Fox Kids back on February the 2nd, 1993, which means we just celebrated the 28-year anniversary of this episode just a few months back.
Yeah, that episode and I have that in common. Yes, but this is for the episode Zatanna, which was written by Paul Dini. Boy, was it. Directed by Dick Sebast and Dan Riva, with music by Peter Tomaszek and Narita Tyson-Chu, and animation by Dong Yang. And that synopsis reads as such. A stage magician and former friend of Bruce Wayne is framed for grand larceny. Okay. Yeah. Bare bones, but that is, in fact, the plot of the episode.
We've had worse.
Yeah. I guess we can kind of jump into plot from there. But yeah, so this is, as we mentioned up top, and as the title of the episode would suggest, it's a DC Comics character, and we very quickly get a flashback. We see Bruce Wayne and Alfred in attendance at this magician Zatanna's show, and through a little bit of dialogue, we very quickly get a flashback to a young Bruce Wayne, probably the youngest Bruce Wayne we've ever seen.
I think you mean John Smith.
You're right. We can't confirm for sure that this is Bruce Wayne, but Bruce Wayne seems to be having a flashback to when he in fact learned how to be an escape artist under the tutelage of one John Zatara and his daughter Zatanna.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to tie in these classic DC characters here while giving you a little bit more of the Bruce Wayne backstory, tying into just how he became the escape artist that he is today. And it's interesting because we've seen him sort of use a lot of these escape artistry skills in various different episodes. I think the one that stands out to me is maybe Be a Clown, where he did a very Houdini-esque escape, which of course you you can hear in the archives at DCAUreview.com if you're interested in hearing our take on that episode. But it's interesting because this does give a little bit of background, at least, for why and how he became such a great and skillful escape artist. Because, quite frankly, that isn't always explored in a lot of areas, and maybe that idea of him being a Houdini-like character isn't always translated into every form of media. Comics for sure, but maybe not in the movies. But definitely something that was heavily relied upon in this series. So it's great that they at least gave it some sort of explanation.
You've got the makings of a great magician. I'm sorry you're going to be moving on.
Same here. It was an honor to study with you, Zatanna.
But to what end? 3 months ago you appeared on my doorstep with no interest in performing, and yet dying to become an escape artist. And for some reason I wound up teaching you secrets I'd never shown another magician.
You could have sent me away.
No, there was something inside you I had no right to deny. Something deep and painful. After all, I would be foolish to assume I was the only one with secrets. John Smith?
Yeah, I think it's cool. Obviously, there's always sort of that idea that as a young man, Bruce Wayne traveled the world. We've seen the flashbacks to him learning his fighting techniques in Night of the Ninja and Day of the Samurai previously in the series. And so to see a little bit more of his training, where else he learned throughout his life, I think is quite a bit of fun, and again explores who Bruce Wayne was and kind of how motivated he was to become this thing. And when we flash a little bit further forward in the timeline to say the flashbacks that we see in Mask of the Phantasm, where he's had the training and is kind of putting the final pieces together to become this legendary Batman character. It's fun to see that, and it creates an interesting episode because Batman does not. As the episode continues on, Zatanna, her big trick is that she's going to make all of this money disappear because her show is taking place in front of the Gotham Mint. Naturally, where else would you hold a magic show? Like maybe a theater? No, just on the street in front of the Gotham Mint.
Rain or shine, apparently.
Of course. So she makes the money disappear, but when she goes to bring it back, it is in fact not there. And so the owner of the proprietor of the Gotham Mint, as well as this strange magician skeptic, he is referred to as a professional magic debunker, that being the villain of this episode, Dr. Montague Kane.
Such a villainous name.
Oh yes, it's straight out of as we'll get to more of that probably in visuals later, but it's straight out of like an Indiana Jones or something like that. But they're very quick to assume that Zatanna must have stolen the money as she's unable to bring it back.
Like immediately, right to jail.
Like 4 cops run up on the stage. They drive a cop car onto the stage. Like it's real quick.
They got their billy clubs out. They're ready for a fight.
Yeah, they were pretty aggressive in this case. But so of course Batman does not believe that she could possibly have been the one that stole it. So he takes something of a risk, and I kind of wish that would have been followed up on a little bit more. She's in a transport on her way to jail, and Batman lands on top of the truck and breaks her out, and they go off to sort of solve the mystery of who set her up. But it's like we don't get any sort of like only one person could have broken her out, right out of a moving truck. It was Batman clearly. But we don't see anything of like him being in conflict with the police or of, say, like a Commissioner Gordon, or obviously the obvious one would probably be Bullock to be the one that finds out about this. But I guess they just didn't feel like they had time.
Maybe they chalked it up to magic.
Yes. She just disappeared and it's magic. But yeah, that's sort of the second half of the episode is they go on the hunt for this Dr. Montague Kane, who they quickly figure out must be behind it, and it's a death trap at his big castle mansion, and then they set up the final confrontation on this giant flying wing.
Yeah, where have we seen one of those before?
Yes, that he's trying to escape and sort of avoid extradition charges on by escaping to a foreign country. And that's where we get kind of our final confrontation of the episode.
Yeah, and it's interesting because backtracking just a little bit, we do see that there is some connection there. Bruce isn't quite ready to reveal that he is John Smith, and as far as we know, we don't get that Zatanna knows that he's Bruce. There's not even a wink or a nod for her to recognize that he was a young Bruce Wayne. She knows that Batman is the John Smith because of a reveal that he does in the culmination of the scene where he and Zatanna are chained together and get thrown out of the flying wing. But there is this connecting point where she seems to recognize some part of him that she connected with when they were young and training together. She clearly had quite the crush on him in the flashback scene. So for her to then recognize a similar familiarity to Batman, even as he's connecting with her. And
nice car.
Thanks.
You know, I didn't love the idea of spending the night in jail, but this does technically make me a fugitive. I believe I'm looking at some prison time now.
I heard about the Mint robbery. I can help prove you didn't do it.
Why do you care about some leggy dame in nylons? Or have I answered my own question?
If you want to go it alone.
No, I'm sorry. I'm having a bad day.
I'm sure whoever framed you knew how your trick was done. They may have left a clue at the Mint.
He sort of explains it away. She mentions in passing that her father is gone, and Bruce apologizes, or Batman apologizes rather, and she's kind of befuddled by why he would care or say something like that, and one could argue it would be just Batman's compassion, but clearly he kind of explains it away that he once saw him perform as a child. So very, very interesting. But she remarks that he seems quite familiar in that conversation, and they begin kind of reconnecting throughout there. And then, as you mentioned, they go to Montague Kane's castle where they escape a death trap, and Batman's detective work leads him to find them on the flying wing. How he got on the flying wing? Is that...
We don't see the bat plane. We don't see or the glider or anything in this episode.
Not sure how he got there. Not sure who's flying the plane. Maybe Alfred was there. And Batman...
and it's already in the air. It's not like we see it take off.
Correct.
So
he didn't sneak aboard. So
he might have. We didn't see that.
Yeah.
But the implication is there's this voiceover from Kane taunting them, and he's like, "I'm already going to somewhere friendlier," or whatever. So the implication there, and then when we cut to the next scene, they're already in the air, and he's remarking about how he's going to get away with all of this money scot-free, and then they just sort of appear. So,
right.
So yeah, that's and they get captured and are seemingly about to be chained up and thrown out of a moving plane. And that is sort of when Batman fully reveals himself to be this John Smith that she knew as he is the only one who ever called her Zana, and which I thought was kind of a cute little way to reveal that.
With all reverence for the departed, Zatanna himself couldn't escape those locks. Still, between the two of you, you might be able to loosen a few chains before you hit the water.
Take my hand.
Scared? That makes two of us.
Trust me, Zana.
Zana?
Quick, in my glove.
And they're able to escape the chains, and they're sort of holding on as they're falling out of the plane onto this net, and it's a very dramatic final battle on the top. It's the Batman against Kane's two thugs on the wing of the plane for most of the rest of the episode there, and it is quite dramatic. And at one point, Kane sort of takes control of the plane and is flying, and we'll certainly get more into this in visuals as well. And then, we have as they defeat the bad guys and are able to land the plane, we have kind of this nice moment again where Zatanna asks him kind of why did he end up the way he is, and he sort of explains it away as what you would expect Batman to say, which is painful memories and a promise that he made, and she. But I think the greatest part here is the ending where she pulls a disappearing act on Batman.
Yeah, it would have been interesting to have Batman give the old line, so that's how that feels, or something like that. But yeah, it was interesting. And then she leaves only behind a signed poster made out to John, mentioning that she hates goodbyes as well. But it's interesting because we don't get the return of this Zatanna in this series, but of course we do know that she does return later on in Justice League Unlimited. So we do know that she shall return, but this sort of pseudo-romance isn't really ever much touched on again, at least in the animated series. So it's sort of left kind of as a one and done here with this. But Liam, I guess that will bring us to the end of our discussion here for plot. Overall, I think it's a fun episode, but I think it does feel a little bit rushed at times. You're introducing a brand new character. I would have loved to have seen more flashback scenes.
Agreed.
Kind of detailing more of the relationship that Zatanna and quote unquote John Smith had at that time. You're led to believe, at least by the scene, that Bruce really was focused solely on his training and didn't have much of an interest romantically to her, and it was more of a one-sided thing. But then as the episode goes on, you kind of see that maybe I don't know, maybe he never did have a romantic interest in her. Maybe it was strictly a friendship, but for them to sort of allude to that seems a little bit strange based on that one flashback scene that we had.
Yeah, I definitely think we could have seen more of that in a future episode that we have not yet reviewed, because we review them in order as well. Batman Beyond, Zatanna does make it into his Lost Loves photo collage with Selena Kyle and Talia and Barbara, of course, and Lois Lane, I believe, is in there as well. But yeah, so it does seem that there was something there. Whether it was more of a brother-sister love or a romantic love, it's not really quite made clear at that point. But it's just a woman that he clearly had great affection for. But yeah, we don't really get to see enough of that. And we'll talk about that later in voice acting, because there is a very strong familiarity, I think, in the voice performances that we'll talk about. But on screen, what we see that one flashback, and then again for most of the episode, she doesn't really know who he is.
Right.
So I don't know if you either rework it where the reveal comes earlier, or if you maybe just needed to focus more on that and less on the action of the piece. But again, it's still a kid's cartoon, and maybe the action needs to come first at some point. So. It was tough for me to grade this one because there's a lot of stuff I like about it, but I ended up settling on a 6 out of 10 for plot.
Nice. I went just a tick higher for my score. I went a 7 out of 10. I think this might be one that they could have stretched out to a two-parter. I don't know. You probably would have needed a stronger villain, perhaps a different villainous plot, because I don't know if that. Where'd the money go? Oh, it's hidden by the debunker. I guess maybe you could have had some red herrings or something in the initial disappearance of the money that may have lent to a little bit more of an interesting elongated plot story there. But again, I think that they missed out on an opportunity, especially with having Paul Dini write this episode, like having him write a very strong backstory. But then again, when you think about it, they went so much into Batman's backstory and love interest history with Mask of the Phantasm. You wonder if they were worried about being derivative of that story.
Yeah, and I think for that story, it's made so clear that Andrea is like his one true love to that point, that before he becomes Batman, that maybe if they thought they made it like too melodramatic or too romantic, that maybe that would take away from what he chooses to kind of give up, or what is taken away from him in Mask of the Phantasm as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Either way, I think this is an episode that's fun. It doesn't drag. It moves very quickly. Not a ton of action. I think the culmination of the entire thing is where most of the action comes from. The fight on the plane. A little bit with the escape, the intrigue and the escape part of the death trap, but not tons of action either. So like last week's episode, where we had a story that relied heavily on the story itself, the plot itself, this was kind of like a mix of it, but I feel like neither of those things were terribly strong.
Yeah, and I think we can also kind of use this as our transition to talking about visuals, but other than the setting of the final battle being on the side of a plane, this very much, not in a tone way, but in the way it's structured as a story, felt like it could be an episode of the Adam West Batman to me.
Yeah.
Where you have like your celebrity guest star show up and the villain makes their move, and then there's a death trap that Batman must escape from, and then the final battle is him fighting like 2 or 3 guys for a couple minutes.
That's true. It's very
if you added in a few more quips and camp and some bam pow wham sound effects on the screen, I think this could have been again, not from a tone or even really a story perspective, just kind of the way the story is structured.
Yeah, I agree. That's fair. All right, well then let's move on to visual and animation. Liam, we can talk about that today. So I believe, as you mentioned, there are multiple directors for this episode, which according to the trivia is because one of the directors may have stepped out or departed midway through the actual episode here, so we ended up having Dan Reba step in.
Fill in. So I think this is Dick Sebast's last episode on the series. He had previously directed Robin's Reckoning, and I think the second part of The Cat and the Claw, and a few other episodes. So had some pretty strong ones under his belt, but I guess moved on to other projects. And while this episode was still in production, so Dan Reba was able to step up and take the reins to finish it. And from a visual perspective, I mean, what we always talk about, especially in these original run Batman episodes, is how Batman himself looks, because it can vary widely from episode to episode. It's consistent, but it is kind of a mixture. You pointed out to me, where you have a little bit of the longer nose on the cowl, but maybe the ears aren't quite as long.
Yeah, it's not that. I felt like Batman's jaw was very square for the majority of the episode, which rings truer to those original Bruce Timm drawings and storyboards. So I feel like that's it, but there was at times where that cowl was a little bit droopier and his chin was a little bit like bigger, which lends more to that other style that we've seen throughout various episodes. But yeah, I think model wise, mostly everybody looked to be on model. I did feel the characters moved a little stiffly at times, especially in that flashbacks scene with Zatara and Zatanna and Bruce all together. There was some stiffness there. With that scene, though, as we've commented several times, I love the visual device of using that sepia tone on the flashbacks to really drive home the fact that this is not modern day, to differentiate it between what you're watching in real time and that those flashbacks. And of course, we've seen that several times before. It's a great visual device to use. I really thought that looked great. I thought the character model for Zatara himself was very, very 1920s, putting on the Ritz. Really enjoyed that. Even the way that he walked as he was walking away out of the scene, I thought it was a very Mr. Peanut-esque.
Yeah, he looks like he steps out of like Moulin Rouge or something.
Yeah, for
very,
sure.
Very old time show business, like you said, 1920 show business guy. And I guess we kind of forgot to mention this in plot, but there is a great moment where Zatanna is showing him a card trick, and she thinks she's given him the 2 of hearts, but in reality, she's actually given him... and the point is she's trying to tell his future with these cards, and in fact, she hands him a card. She asks if it's the 2 of hearts, and he looks down, and it happens to be a Joker.
I thought you'd be finishing the tour with us.
I'm leaving for Japan tomorrow. There's still a lot I have to learn.
Boy, that's you. One big serious schoolboy. No time in your life for fun or magic. Here, pick a card. I'll tell your future. I see emotion, intensity, 2 of hearts.
Joker.
Oh, it's a dumb trick anyway.
Which, of course, hilarious.
That's a tremendous, like, Paul Dini quirky joke to throw in there. That, well, she did really tell his future,
right,
even though she got the trick wrong.
2 of hearts, she thought, but not her heart, that's for sure. Him and the Joker, doing it forever. But yeah, I thought that was a great great gag there too. I think for the most of it, the rest of it, as we mentioned, the visual trap, as you mentioned, I think in the beginning is a nod to Indiana Jones, with the spike walls closing, trying to crush Batman and Zatanna together. And then there's some fisticuffs at the end that we get not only Batman punching and kicking guys, we see a kick connect with I love how they got around the censorship with a red flash as the kick connects, so you don't exactly see the kick connect, but you know that it connects based on the flash. We saw that in last week's episode too with a white flash. So enjoyed that. And then even Zatanna herself gets in on the action with a little bit of fisticuffs as well.
That's right. That's kind of the finale there, is Batman's handling the thugs, and it looks like maybe Montague Kane's going to escape. She appears behind him and gives him just a straight right cross.
Well, and that was after... Previously, again, some of these things that get past the standards and practices, he is captured Zatanna, and is, before he chains her to Batman, says that compliments how attractive she is, and says that he might spare her if he's, quote, properly implored, unquote. Which I was like, how in the world did they get that past the censors? But she does a great job of smashing his foot in the process with her stiletto. So really enjoyed that. And then, of course, we actually get, I guess, what is technically the series debut of the Flying Wing.
That's right.
Which, of course, we see later on, famously in World's Finest, or the Batman Superman movie, however you like to call it. And then later on, of course, in the Savage Time, they return. There's some flying wings there as well. So a visual device that this one I feel like was modeled directly out of a Fleischer Superman cartoon. Very, I think the initial presentation of it is done with it in a painting. It's a painted version of it versus an animated version of it. So for that reason, it brought up a lot of those Fleischer Superman feelings of it. But love those flying wings.
Absolutely, yeah. It's just this giant, massive aircraft. They're in like a ballroom at one point. Like, it's this giant vehicle. So even though it's theoretically a plane, you can have a lot of different sets, as it were, for these backdrops. And yeah, the final bit there, some tremendous #Kate movement as Batman is on the wing of the plane fighting the 2 thugs, and
who he, by the way, throws off to their death.
Yeah, they do not pop back out of the water. We do not see them. We do not see them in the police vehicle at the end when Kane's being loaded in. So as far as we know, Batman killed those guys.
Well, in his defense, he pushed one of them out of the way, and he fell into the other one, and they both fell thousands of feet off of the flying wing into the water below. So, but yeah, typically, as we mentioned, even when we interviewed Kevin Altieri, the director of the episode Off Balance, that typically they were required, even from great heights, if somebody fell from a great height, they'd have to land in water, and then their heads would have to pop up at some point to show that they were alive. So the fact that they snuck this past the standards and practices, I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, usually that was a very strong mandate, or at the very least, or if they're knocked unconscious, you had to have a keep alive groan, as it was known. That was kind of a fascinating little twist when they fall into the water and it just cuts away. So
indeed. I guess the last thing, Liam, that we should talk about then is Zatanna herself and her visually. Very much based on, I guess, her original look. She's had a lot of different looks since then, more mystical appearances. This one, of course, more the traditional magician's garb. She does have the I believe she even mentions it at one point that Batman must just be interested in her because she's a leggy dame in nylons. But a very interesting visual there. But I think what makes this episode even funnier, because Paul Dini was the director, is that he ended up marrying someone who not only looked a lot like Zatanna, but was also a magician.
That's right. The great Misty Lee is his wife. They've been married for a while now, and it is very funny because. And I know he's talked about that Zatanna was always one of his favorite characters growing up and reading as he got older, and was very excited to work her into Batman the Animated Series when they had the chance. And of course, he later comes back and writes an episode of Justice League with her in it. So you can tell the love he had with the character. He also did a run on a Zatanna comic in the 2000s. So it is very funny that he had such a love for this character, and then he kind of ended up marrying himself a real life Zatanna at the end, later in his life, which is a pretty cool little nugget there.
Yeah, that's right. So for all that, I guess we can get into our scores here for our visuals and animation. So not a whole lot, as we said here, visually that is interesting. We get that final battle, but there is a lot, and the tension that's built in the scene with the spiky death trap. But there isn't a whole lot of interesting visuals other than maybe that sepia-toned flashback, because it's a lot of dialogue happening between Zatanna and Batman, and there's a lot of time that takes place in the Batmobile, actually, them discussing things and them having dialogue that way. So there's not a whole lot visually here that's interesting. It's not a negative. I don't think that there's nothing that looks bad. So for all those reasons, I ended up giving visual and animation a 6 out of 10.
Yeah, and I'm just a tick higher. I went 7 out of 10. I think that's a fair assessment of it. There's certainly nothing bad or off model or anything, but there is sort of a lack. I do think the backgrounds are very cool, like that castle. I kind of wish they had just stayed in the castle mansion for the whole rest of the episode.
Yeah, that would have been interesting.
Because that was to me a way more interesting visual place, and the idea of them kind of having to do more, because the idea of, okay, he learned how to be an escape artist, so the finale of the episode, which it kind of is because they have to escape from the chains and they're hanging on the net out of the plane, but it seems to me like it should have been a more like dramatic death trap that they had to get out of, maybe. And again, maybe that's more of a plot note than a visual note, but because the ending is just Batman kind of punching some guys, it's maybe not as visually interesting as it perhaps could have been in retrospect. I do love, like I said, the ending there is Batman kind of turns to say something to her, and you just see a little bit of smoke and this flash of light, and she's gone. And then he picks up the poster with her note on it, and kind of gives a little wry smile, and then it sort of pans up and.
So, you never wrote.
I meant to, really.
Hey, it's okay. I can see you've been busy. Just answer an old friend one question.
Shoot.
What happened that made you put this on?
A painful memory. And a promise.
I'd say you're keeping that promise pretty well. And for what it's worth, Dad would have been proud of you tonight.
You too. Can I give you a ride?
John, I hate goodbyes too. Love, Zana. P.S. Don't forget to write.
And that's sort of the end of our episode. I do think that ending is really neat. They do some visual things with that. Yeah, certainly not the greatest visuals we've ever seen or animation we've ever seen in an episode, but definitely some cool stuff in there.
For sure. Interestingly enough, sidebar, the DC Collectibles RIP Zatanna figure from the Batman the Animated Series even comes with that poster. So great that she got a figure out of this episode also, and
yes.
the accessories were some of the underrated things about that line. But anyway, moving on to our next category here, Liam, which is going to be music, and didn't have a whole ton of notes about music this week. There's a couple spots where the Shirley Walker Batman theme kicks in. There's a little bit of when they're on the wing. I think that to me was the scene that stood out the most. The fight scene on the wing was where the music seemed to play up the most. And then, of course, there's a little bit of it that comes in at the very beginning as Zatanna's preparing to do the trick. But what notes did you have with regards to music today?
Yeah, the music stood out to me most is the music we hear right at the start when the title card comes up. It's sort of this kind of very kind of Vegas-y, brass band kind of intro as we introduce the Zatanna character, which I really liked, and sounded kind of that sort of music that's sort of adding to the wonderment as she's doing all these cool tricks right at the start of the episode. And then the only other real musical note I had beyond kind of what you already mentioned about some of the ways the Batman theme was worked in, I thought the music when they are in the Spike death trap, which itself I believe is an homage to a scene in Indiana Jones. I thought that there's some pretty great dramatic, the pace kind of quickens to the music as it gets more dire, and Batman's pulling the spikes off the wall to try to stop them from moving at first, and then they're trying to kind of jimmy loose the trap door that they fell in. So I think the music's pretty strong in there. But yeah, I did not have a ton of musical notes beyond that. Like I said, I did really like those two spots of the music, and for those reasons, I ended up settling on a 6 out of 10 for music.
Nice. I gave it just a tick higher. I gave a 7 out of 10. I think that Zatanna theme at the beginning is pretty strong. I enjoyed that. And then, like I said, the music that plays during that fight scene on the wing were pretty strong. There is a lot of silence that's used in this, though, as they are in the Batmobile, and there's a lot, as we said, kind of dialogue heavy between Bruce and Zatanna in a lot of it. There's a little bit that plays also when they're breaking into the Mint together to try and figure out just kind of how the trick, which, by the way, we didn't talk about in plot, but they don't really... There's a hologram reflection that's involved, but we don't really, it's very much explained away in a way where you don't have to think very much about how the plot itself worked. But anyway, as they're sort of discovering that there's a giant mirror in the middle of the Mint that was used to help get the money away, or to distract, or used, I guess, to reflect a hologram to make it look like that there was money in the Mint when it wasn't there ever at all. There's some music that plays in there that adds to a little bit of the risk and the tension that's happening. But other than that, yeah, I didn't have a whole lot. I don't know that it needed it this week based on the conversation and the way that the dialogue ended up being the focus. So it's not a detriment, as I don't think we've ever said that the music is a detriment to especially not Batman the Animated Series episodes, but just not needed this week for a strong dialogue heavy episode.
Yeah, I think my only other note was the music at the very end, as he's kind of looking at the poster and smiling, and then it sort of pans up. There's kind of a nice little, your period or your exclamation point on the episode. I thought the music was quite nice in that scene as well.
There you go. All right, Liam, let's move on to our final category of the day, and that is going to be our voice acting. So we actually have a not a huge cast this week. A couple of our returning series regulars, but then we have a gentleman who we've talked about several times before, making a return as yet another new character, and then we have an additional guest star that we'll talk about. So let's talk about this week's voice cast.
Yeah, just briefly, I'll mention I liked Vincent Schiavelli as Zatara. Again, I wish we could have gotten more of that. that flashback there, but I like he's just kind of a very warm and kind voice, and despite only having one scene, like, you do totally buy, I think, that he and Bruce, or John Smith as he's known in the scene, clearly have had a strong relationship built over some time. So I liked him, and
he has the designation, as the DCAU wiki pointed out, as one of few people that actually was both in the Burton films and also in the DC animated universe.
That's right.
He played he played the organ grinder in Batman Returns. Who could forget that magical role? Naturally. Yeah, he's a you would recognize his face if you saw him.
For sure.
Cool that they brought him into for not a major role either, but just another one of those guest roles that ended up being a trivia fact of a person that crossed over between the Burton movies that made this whole series happen, of course, and the actual DCAU itself.
Absolutely, and as mentioned, Cal, someone we've talked about several times before, we have Michael Yorke returning as the villainous Dr. Montague Kane. Montague Kane sure sounds a lot like Ares, the god of war, from Hawk and Dove.
You said that, and I was like, what if?
Come in and join me by the fire. Come, don't be shy. You've obviously unraveled my little scheme, and I would congratulate you face to face.
You're not gonna have a face when I'm done with you. Now, you slimy...
It's a trap!
A trifle cliched, I know, but effective nonetheless. And while you briefly savor your fleeting triumph, I am winging toward more comfortable surroundings. And you?
What if?
I don't know exactly how this would lead to war, but we can't rule it out, because it sounds just like him.
Maybe he was taking... Okay, follow this thought train, okay? He was robbing the mint to go to a country where he would not be extradited, to then take that money and fund, like, some sort of rebellion in that country against the government of that country, causing a coup, which would then create a war between whoever the rebels are and the country's standard government.
Okay, all right, I'm with it.
Are you with it?
I'm with it. I'm ready to give this the canon until proven otherwise stamp.
Listen,
that we like to
if
give
Martian
things.
Manhunter was the mayor of Metropolis, as we talked about in the episode Speed Demons, which you can hear in the archives at DCAUreview.com if you're curious about that one, then I don't see why Ares, the god of war, could also not be Dr. Montague Kane.
I see no reason why not, and you can't prove that we're wrong.
That's right.
So take that. But no, it is interesting, and probably the most interesting little audio Easter egg of the episode. And if you have been listening for a while, you'll know back when we interviewed Kevin Altieri, the director of Off Balance, when we reviewed that episode, he mentioned that he and Andrea Romano had really wanted Michael Yorke to play Ra's al Ghul. And I guess he was maybe tentatively cast in that role before that was later changed, and Michael Yorke ends up playing Count Vertigo as well as this character. But they do have Mr. Yorke at one point refer to Batman as detective in this episode, and that doesn't seem like it's an accident.
Keep your distance, detective.
No, I think that was a nice neat little nod, and you wonder if it was... You know, I don't know how much ad-libbing actors had the freedom to do, whether it was something that he ad-libbed as a little wink or something they just threw in there as a little wink and a nod to the other directors, or, you know, obviously Mr. Altieri was not involved in this episode directly, but he did so passionately speak about his love for Michael Yorke and how fortunate he felt to be able to work with such a legendary actor on the series. So yeah, it was a nice little wink and a nod. And when we heard it, we were like, we both just kind of looked at each other and we were like, "Yep, that was something that we would not have otherwise picked up on had we not heard that story." So if you're interested in hearing that, go back and check out in the archives at DCAUreview.com our review of Off Balance. One of our favorite episodes, just because we got some great insight and behind the scenes stories from the episode's director Kevin Altieri. But yeah, that was a cute little nod, and it is interesting because we talked about it certainly on that episode, but. On Off Balance, he had a standard sort of Eastern European accent that he ended up using with his very unique but recognizable voice, and then the multiple roles that he ends up playing in the DCAU going forward. It's really hard not to hear that voice and go, I don't know that this is so much this character as it is the guy. It's hard to separate him from the actual character itself, if that makes sense.
Agreed, yeah. Not that he does a bad job at all, but it is just so, like we said, so obviously him, and it is funny that they threw in those little nods to it. And yeah, he does. It's a very over the top, like I said, a very like an Indiana Jones type villain, which I think is also something we talked about with Mr. Altieri when we reviewed his performance in Off Balance. It's not so drastically over the top. He's not a completely unhinged, over the top thespian, as it were. But it's very, let me explain my evil plans to you, and let me narrate to you as I put you in a death trap and chain you up, and as you said, the very lewd line that he gets to give to Zatanna is he's, like I said, it's a good performance, but it's very, very recognizable as Michael Yorke in the episode. And then of course, in addition to a little bit of Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. as Alfred, who does get just a phenomenal burn in on Batman right at the start of the episode. But other than that, of course, in addition to Kevin Conroy's Batman, he gets to play off of Julie Brown as Zatanna, who actually did appear in one previous episode, dollar in the bad episode jar, Eternal Youth.
Oh, no.
Probably my least favorite episode we've reviewed to date.
Worse than Unity?
I hated that more than Unity.
Oh, my goodness.
But I hate Alfred's friend.
Maggie.
Who is that? We've never heard of her before or since.
Check out that one in the archives at DCAUreview.com if you want to hear
It's a double feature with a good episode.
Correct.
So it's not a complete hate fest. We try to keep things somewhat positive here. But anyway, she was a voice in that episode and did voices on Animaniacs and a lot of other Warner Brothers animation throughout the years. And I think the strength, because at the start of the episode I'm like, she's fine. I don't really love this performance. But I think where it starts to get strong is the scene you mentioned earlier, Cal, in Plot, where she mentions that her father has passed, and Kevin Conroy's Batman kind of begins to let the facade drop a little bit and sort of speaks to her in a more emotional voice. And the scene at the end when they're chained up and he says, "Trust me, Zana," and I think they're playing off of each other. You really do feel like that there is some familiarity there, and these people do know each other and care for each other.
Yeah, I agree. It does start off like her showy performance voice was fine. I think that once she has to start acting a little bit, it does seem a little bit dry and emotionless. Her scene in the flashback with Bruce, I thought was, and I don't know how much of it was because Bruce was playing that younger, or that Kevin Conroy was playing that younger version of Bruce Wayne, or John Smith in this case, but they had almost negative chemistry, it felt like, in that scene. I didn't feel like they, again, I guess maybe I'm trying to remember it, or maybe my perception of it was that it was a little bit more mutually romantic between the two of them, but Kevin Conroy's performance in that scene seems like almost very wooden, and hers doesn't very much complement it in a positive way either. However, that those scenes that they go on, and as you just pointed out, the scene in the Batmobile, their initial conversation, the Batmobile, as they're connecting, and then as they're trying to escape the death trap, I think I thought was good, and then that final scene I think was great, and they had great chemistry in that final scene. So not an uneven performance for the most part, good to great, with a little bit of maybe not so great at the beginning, but I felt like her performance really ended very strongly there. And so combine that with your Kevin Conroy performance, who's mostly Batman in this episode, a little bit of Bruce Wayne at the beginning, but mostly Batman, and then Michael Yorke, who, by the way, so Michael Yorke played a count, a doctor, a Greek god, and he also played Kanto, a new god. Man, that guy just ran the gamut of different various characters. That guy's just very smart and very powerful, apparently, no matter what incarnation he is. But all that, I think it's a pretty strong episode. A lot of it, as we said, was dialogue heavy, and because I didn't feel like Zatanna's dialogue was completely consistent, that I did take a little bit off for that. And just the sort of the Michael Yorke being so many different characters across the series that we've reviewed, that's not his fault. He does a fine job in it, but it is a little bit distracting. It's the same thing we talked about when you hear, Mark Hamill's initial performance in Heart of Ice, where it's just a little bit jarring to hear that character not as the other characters that you are more familiar with him playing. I hear him more as Kanto than I do, I think, any of the other characters, just because I feel like I saw those episodes so much growing up. But for all those reasons, I ended up giving voice acting a 7 out of 10. So strong, but not without its lacking in places.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I went with an 8 out of 10, so not too far off there. I think for all the reasons we mentioned, I think everyone is at least good. And I think the strengths of it are definitely Julie Brown and Kevin Conroy playing off of each other. But yeah, I think also, as we mentioned in the plot, we wish we could have gotten more of those flashbacks to really kind of deepen that relationship a little bit more. So maybe the reveal, when he finally does reveal himself as Batman to her, means a tick more. But that, again, that's more of a plot note than a voice acting note. But definitely a strong job all around.
Agreed. All right, Liam. Well, that will bring us to our final scores for this week. So totaling everything up, I end up with a 27 out of 40 for this week. What about you?
And I end up with the exact same score.
How does this happen?
Despite the fact that I don't think we agreed on a score for a single category.
That is correct.
But one of us being up and down only by one point each round still ended up with the exact same score of 27 out of 40.
So let's discuss rewatchability here. So this one is interesting because we did mention at the top of the episode, it's the first crossover. It's the first time we get sort of an inkling that the DCAU exists outside of Batman. And again, this episode does not portray her as a crime-fighting superhero.
Correct.
But we know later on that she comes back into play. She joins the Justice League. So canon-wise, this is the first sort of expansion on the DCAU lore here. So, however, there's not a lot that comes out of this episode. As we said, it seems like there's a little bit of a disconnect between this episode and then that Batman Beyond episode later on, where she's sort of referenced as one of his Batman's great loves. Where do you fall on this episode as being a rewatch?
I would say it's important enough for a rewatch, just because it is a character that's going to appear again later on, and it is historic in that, later on, obviously, in this series, we have a Jonah Hex episode. Obviously, Superman had crossovers galore, but this was really kind of the first big one. So yeah, I think it's worth watching just kind of for that reason, and because I am always a fan of getting to see a little bit more of Bruce Wayne before he became Batman. And like I said, I think that's a missed opportunity of this episode, but it's the same thing that kind of draws me back to this episode is anyone that kind of knew him before he was Batman coming back into his life, I think is really a fun and fascinating tool for a story. And so I think for all those reasons, I would give this 2 thumbs up for rewatchability.
All right, gotcha. I'll go with 1 thumb up. I think I do agree with you with it being such like a monumental occasion of the expansion of the rosters of heroes, and then as you said, she does come back into play later on in some Justice League episodes. So yeah, that's important. I think that if you're just laying out the most important or most interesting episodes of Batman, this one, while it does give you a little bit of Batman's backstory, it's not enough, in my opinion, to necessarily say you have to watch it, because it's not really followed up on, it's not really touched on very much after this. So it's good, it's fine. It's a 22-minute action-packed, or not as much action-packed, fun episode. We'll just say that. Yeah,
I think this is a reverse. I think a lot of time we'll talk about an episode that's maybe important to the series, but not to the DCAU as a whole. And this is almost kind of the reverse of that, in that it's kind of important to the DCAU, as it's the first sign of that larger universe out there. But to the series, it isn't particularly important.
Agreed. All right, Liam. Well, that will begin to wrap us up for this week's episode. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and checking us out. Don't forget, you can subscribe to us on your favorite podcast apps. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio. We also are an Anchor podcast, so you can check us out on Anchor. One of the features on Anchor, Liam, is that you can actually sort of like leave us voice messages based on that. We had a gentleman that left us a voice message last week, said some very kind things, so we very much appreciate that. He actually asked us, why don't we do the Justice League episodes in order, or why haven't we covered certain Justice League episodes yet? And interestingly enough, that'll lead us in a second to what we're about to preview for next month. But the reason is we kind of decided we're going to do the Batman the Animated Series episodes in order, but we wanted the freedom to kind of jump around a little bit with our other reviews, and we stuck with order for Batman Beyond, but everything else we kind of go willy-nilly and kind of how we're feeling for that month.
Yeah, and as one can see if you look at the episodes we reviewed, we're not going to review, we didn't review the first episode of JLU until we had recorded episodes featuring most of the big important episodes of the original Justice League series, like Starcross, like Savage Time, like A Better World. So yeah, it might be a little. We don't really think of that. I think because we're in the bubble that it might be a little confusing for a newer listener. But again, we appreciate anyone that reaches out to us either through Anchor with that voice message feature, or of course on Instagram or Twitter at DCAU Review, both of those places. But yeah, that's kind of the long and short of it. Is for the Batman shows, including Beyond, we go in order,
which explains why we've yet to cover a Zeta Project episode, right, Liam?
Exactly, because we have not gotten to his debut in Batman Beyond just yet.
It's not because we're avoiding it like the plague.
Absolutely not. That's not what's happening. For sure.
For sure. Well, all right, Liam. Well, that will bring us to start previewing next week's episode, which is actually going to kick off a new month. And Liam, I have titled this month The Month of Magic.
Yeah, it's Magic May, the month of magic. It's not like Magic Mike, although there is a couple of shirtless dudes, because Aquaman's going to show up a couple times. But yes, we will be talking about using this episode, Zatanna, as the launching point. We will be looking at different mystical appearances throughout the DCAU with a variety of the shows. And in fact, next week we are kicking it off with a Superman the Animated Series episode, that being entitled The Hand of Fate.
That's right, we get the introduction, as one might guess, of Dr. Fate to the DCAU and Superman the Animated Series. One of those episodes that, if I recall, played about 357,000 times on Saturday mornings on Kids WB. So I'll be interested. I got pretty sick of it as a child, so I'll be interested to see if I am still sick of it when we go back to review it, but I look forward to doing that. Don't forget also you can support the podcast. Subscribe to us on the Pod Tower on YouTube. That's one way to support us. Even if you don't digest your podcast via YouTube, we would love for you to go subscribe there. Support us. It also supports our good friends at Tim Talk. They actually do all of the DCAU in order from start to finish. So
God bless them.
Check those guys out. Absolutely, they've done everything. I believe they are currently in Justice League Unlimited. So get about to kick off Justice League Unlimited. So check out their podcast either on YouTube or you can subscribe to them on the other podcast apps as well. Also, part of the Pod Tower, of course, is our good friends over at the Watchtower Database, who are just amazing DCAU content creators. Love those guys, good friends of ours. So check them out. Subscribe to that page. You can also get yourself a shirt, a hat, a mug. Head over to DCAUreview.com. Click on the store tab. Pick yourself up some piece of merch to support the pod if you like us. Also, leave a review if you like to. Leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts for us. Tell the good people out there what you like about us, or maybe don't like about us too. That's okay. But either way, Liam, I am looking forward to kicking off the month of Magic May, coming next week.
That's right. It's going to be a great time. And we like doing these theme months now, and that's another reason that we don't necessarily go in order with everything. Is we've started doing we've done a character theme month. We did a Green Lantern month last year. We're definitely going to look to do more of those. And now we have kind of a different type of theme month going on. So that's another advantage of not necessarily doing every episode in order for our shows. We get to do these kind of fun stuff and kind of break up I don't like to say monotony, because this show is always fun. We wouldn't do it if it wasn't fun for us. But just kind of switching things up rather than just going show to show to kind of have one or two fun twists on that formula each year is a lot of fun for us.
Absolutely. Look forward to kicking that off next week. But until then, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we'll talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.